Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started on algebra.
Yay!
Done with arithmetic.
All four of us.
We'll get as far as we can, and then if we don't get it all in today, I told Alyssa I'll record the rest during 7th period tomorrow and post it. So we don't have to stay after school tomorrow.
I'm not going.
So, okay. So, algebra, the first thing that you need to know about algebra is you need to know how to solve a simple equation. So, with equations, sometimes you'll be able to use our plugging in strategy, but sometimes you won't. So you're going to need to be comfortable with equations. And remember, your goal when you're solving a simple equation is to get the variable on one side of the equal sign and the numbers on the other. So here in this example, they started off with x's on both sides of the equal sign. So the first thing they did was move this x over here. Here's the equal sign in the middle. So to move a plus x over to the other side, we minus x. And 9x minus 1x, that's where that 8x comes from. And so once you get the variable on one side, it's a two-step equation. 2 steps and you're done. You're trying to get x by itself, so you add 4 to both sides. You get 8x equals 16, and then you divide both sides by 8. So x is 2. Okay, so just remember that that's your goal, is to try to get the variable by itself on one side of the equal sign. Okay, polynomial equations. This is where you've got multiple variables all on one side of the equal sign. They look tricky, but they follow all the same rules of simple equations. Just add or subtract the like terms, or that means terms that have the same variables raised to the same power. So, for example, here we have a polynomial equation. It's got 3 z terms all on one side together. They're all z to the first power, so they're all like terms. So you just add them up by adding their coefficients, that's the numbers in front. You get 14z equals negative 42. Divide both sides by 14 and you get z is negative 3. So just remember, if your like terms are already on the same side of the equal sign, you just combine them. You only have to change signs when you move across the equal sign. Okay, proportions. This is another type of simple equation. When you see two fractions equal to each other, that's a proportion. And you just cross multiply to solve a proportion. So 3 times 2 is 6, and that equals 1 times x, which is x. So x equals 6. Okay. So a couple of different ways that you'll see simple equations. A proportion is one, a basic equation is another, and then a polynomial equation where you've got multiple like terms that you have to combine before you solve. Okay, so we're ready for quick quiz number 1. So if you flip over here, there's 3 problems. It'll take about 5 minutes, a little less if y'all are done sooner than that, just since we're trying to get done a little early today. Or we'll try to get more in today. Alright, so take about 5 minutes for that. Okay, so let's go over these. Alright, so on the first one you should cross multiply, which would give you 9x, or if you do 3x times 3, that will give you 9x. 9x equals, and then Lauren, I heard you say this, got to be sure and distribute whenever you do the other diagonal. It's 5 times x and 5 times 2. So 5x plus 10. And then get the x's together on one side. And then divide both sides by 4. So that's 5 halves, or 2 1/2. the next one. This one is pretty tricky. Okay, when you cross multiply, you get 50 equals x times y. Okay, so we need two numbers that multiply to give us 50. And when we subtract one number from the other, we've got to get that number. So if I think about the things that multiply to give me 50. Alright? Because that's what that says. That says that x times y has to equal 50. So then I could make x be 10 and y be 5, right? Because 10 times 5 is 50. And then 10 minus 5 does equal 5, so that works. So then 5 plus 10 is 15. Okay, the next one, you should get AB plus B when you cross multiply this way. Remember, you have to do...
Ms. Hornsby, please dial 8104. Ms. Hornsby, please dial 8104.
Is that a real teacher?
Yeah, she's one of the inclusions people that goes around and helps the special ed kids that are in the classes. And I can never remember her name. That's her name. Okay, so A times B is AB, and then 1 times B is B. And that has to equal AB plus A. Right? Cross multiply the other way. A times B plus A times 1. AB plus A. Well, you've got AB on both sides, so those cancel out. Right? Because if you tried to get those together, it would cancel them out on both sides, which tells me that B and A are equal. And if B and A are equal, what are you going to get when you subtract them?
0.
0, and anything times 0 is 0. Did you get that one?
Yes, I did. I got the easy one wrong.
You got the easy one wrong. Yeah, sometimes that happens when we try to rush to the hard one. Does that make sense?
Yes.
You can see why these are considered medium and hard. It's not because the math is hard. It's because this is not how you would have been asked a problem in your math classes.
Yeah.
And so it takes some getting used to. And the only way to get good at these is to do them, to practice. The first time I saw this problem, I didn't know what to do with it. I just know what to do with it because I've done it now multiple times. And so now when I see a problem like that, I know what I'm supposed to do. But the first time I said in the SAT class that I was teaching, and I was like, think that for a while. So y'all have the luxury of not having to watch me stammer over these because I've worked them so many times now. Okay, so that was a simple equations quick quiz. All right, the next thing, quadratic equations. You need to know some basic factoring, which always scares people, but it's mainly just basics. And because the SAT is multiple choice, there's normally going to be something there to help you with the factoring. But you'll also need to be able to recognize perfect squares and differences of squares. So to factor, you're going to first draw a pair of empty parentheses. Deal with the first term. It's normally going to be pretty easy to figure out what will give you x squared. So to get x squared, we need x times x. And then you deal with the signs, and on the next slide we'll talk about how you know the signs that you should use. But if the last sign is a negative, your signs are different. If the last sign is a plus, your signs are the same. So the key is we're trying to multiply to give this number here, and add to give this number here. And that's an understood one. So to multiply and get a negative, we need different signs. If you had the same signs, they would multiply and give a positive. And then we have to pick out two numbers that multiply to give us negative 12 and add to give us 1. That would be 4 and negative 3. And again, these are the kind of problems that you just get better at the more of them you do. So you can check your factoring by foiling. You do first x times x, that's x squared. Outside, x times negative 3, that's negative 3x. Inside, 4 times x. And then last, 4 times negative 3. The outside and the inside add up to give you the middle. That's how come we need numbers that multiply to give us negative 12, but add to give us 1, because that's where that 1 comes from. It comes from adding the outside and the inside on foil. So that's just a basic factoring problem. Okay, some guidelines that'll help you. Like I told you a minute ago, if the last term is positive, your signs are going to be the same. They're either both going to be plus or they're both going to be minus, whatever's in the middle. If the last term's negative, your signs are different. Your first try might not be right, so don't be afraid to mess around with it a little bit. Recognizing the difference of two squares, you're going to see what we call conjugates. They're exactly the same, but they have different signs in the middle. So when you see that, that translates to a difference of two squares. Basically what happens when you have conjugates and you FOIL, the outside and inside cancel out because of them being exactly the same but with opposite signs. So you're left with just first and last, x squared minus y squared. And this format works whether you have variables or numbers. So if I see a difference of two numbers squared, I can rewrite that as 57 plus 43, 57 minus 43, and it could make the math a lot easier. Because now it's just 100 times 14, which is 1400. Okay, one more thing. They tell you to memorize these. I don't think it's an absolute necessity to memorize them, but it will make you faster if you recognize them quickly. This is if you square a binomial. If you square x plus y or you square x minus y, remember you can't just square the x and square the y. You have to write them out twice and FOIL. But when you FOIL, it always follows these patterns. So if it's x plus something squared, it's going to end up being x squared plus 2x times the something plus the something squared. And if it's a minus, the only difference is the sign in the middle is a minus. And the big tip for these is this. When you see anything that looks like one form of these expressions, try converting it to its other form. So if it looks like this, FOIL it out. If it looks like this, factor it. So if it's FOILed out, factor it. If it's factored, FOIL it. And that should take you to the answer, because that's what the question is about, is whether or not you can factor and FOIL. All right, so let's try quick quiz number 2. Remember the tip, because it's going to help you on a few of these. I think it helps you on all 3 of them. So take about 5 minutes. And also don't forget our plugging in strategy, see if that works for you if you can't figure out what else to do.